there seemed to be this gap in awareness. And it didn't take too much research, reading a bit of the literature, talking to some physicians, to understand that I was far from alone and that there was this recognized gap between the appropriateness of medication and naltrexone in particular as a frontline treatment for people experiencing alcohol use disorder and the extent to which it is actually prescribed relative to the scale of AUD and its effects in our country.
Welcome everybody, it's Katie, and today I have a really special guest with me. Today I have with me Jonathan, and Jonathan is the founder of OarRx, which is an awesome platform that is making it super easy for people in the States to access the naltrexone medication. So I'm really excited to have you here, Jonathan, to really learn more about you and learn more about what OR is doing to help people who are interested in naltrexone. So first of all, just thank you so much for taking time to chat with me.
Very much my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Katie. We have so much in common in our missions, and so it's a real pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, we really do. It's always fun to have that kind of alignment. I've had my eye on OR, I think, since you guys first started not too long ago. I found your website and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're making naltrexone so easy to get. Like when I needed it 4 years ago, it was like a couple month-long process of trying to find it.
Wow.
So it's just so cool to see that change in just the last few years. I wanted to just start things off, if you don't mind, just really hearing about your personal story, Jonathan, because I know you've had, your own struggles with alcohol, and that's a big reason why you started OR. So did you want to start by kind of telling us your history with alcohol and where you're at with it today?
Absolutely. It would be hard to tell the story of OR without delving into my experiences and changing relationship with alcohol. I struggled with alcohol use disorder since before it was officially called alcohol use disorder, essentially ever since I started drinking in the last years of high school. I really had trouble controlling how much I drank. I never was drinking every day, but too often when I did drink, it got out of control. So somewhere around that third or fourth drink, it just kind of felt like a runaway train was unleashed, and I was drinking way more than I intended to, way more than was pleasurable, and eventually started to experience some of the typical negative consequences that you'd expect. Impact on physical health, big impact on mental health, especially the anxiety, shame and regret associated with drinking so much, damaged some personal relationships, felt like I was less productive and creative at work. And was never at that point where I felt like, oh my goodness, I'm going to lose my job, but didn't have that same energy that I'd once loved at work. A lot of yellow, if not red flags along the way. And I think what ultimately concerned me the most was as I went through my 20s and then into my early 30s, and this pattern just continued to repeat itself. It was getting more severe, not less severe. The frequency and severity of binges increased, and I started to have some really scary incidents where I was kind of concerned for my immediate physical health. So it was kind of an unpleasant trajectory.
Wow, I just relate so much to what you're saying. I love how you said that you didn't have the same creative energy. I'd never put it that way before, but I can totally relate now, the contrast that's there, that alcohol is not a problem anymore. It's like the creativity, the clarity of mind, there's so many benefits that come from it. So thank you for kind of painting that picture of where you were. For how many years were you struggling?
Pretty much. So I'd say, let's see, if you add it up, probably about 15 years.
Not to reveal your age here, sorry. No.
Yeah, exactly. So think 16 to early 30s. So pretty much my entire adult life. It was struggling with alcohol was, in ups and downs, which I think a lot of people experience. It's not, one straight line to rock bottom for most people. And it wasn't for me either. But in one form or fashion, I was struggling with alcohol pretty much my adult life. And so even in those moments where there wasn't an acute personal or professional or health issue presenting itself, I think that's still a pretty big tax on oneself. Even if you feel like you got it more under control, there's a lot of energy going into that could be going to other more productive and fulfilling purposes.
Oh, so true. Had you tried other ways to kind of cut back or moderate, and how did those work for you?
Yeah, so you're really hitting on one of the core motivations for starting OAR, in that I tried a lot of different approaches, starting with AA, talking with primary care physicians. I went to therapy a few times, which was great in many dimensions, but not really in changing the alcohol relationship. And then in some of those kind of scarier acute incidences that I was referencing a little obliquely, think, falling down a flight of stairs, emergency rooms was a place that I sought care. And generally, the advice across all of those different forums, at least the way I encountered them, was quit drinking. And that was the end of it. And in none of those forums was I exposed to medication as an option. And to kind of just add a cherry on top to that story, is kind of in parallel to being a patient or a consumer in those different settings, I also spent my whole professional career in healthcare, at times either directly in behavioral health or in other areas of healthcare, at least adjacent to the management of chronic conditions like alcohol and addiction generally. And I didn't really hear about medication in those settings either. It wasn't until what felt to me like just a very fortunate happenstance that I was connected with an addiction medicine specialist pretty far along in this journey, who suggested medication as part of the toolkit. And that ended up being the big turning point for me.
Wow, that is so cool. And that's like the unfortunate thing that I think is the reality now, and that OAR is really working to change that. When people come to medication treatment, myself included, and almost everyone I've talked to, it's like we accidentally stumble upon it through one way or another. We read an article online, or we happen to talk to someone, or we see that TED Talk by Claudia Christian about her experience with naltrexone. And it's great that people are finding it, but it's not a mainstream source yet. And I think that's why I'm such a fan of what you guys are doing, because you're making it so easy for people to access the medication and kind of removing those barriers. So tell us what happened, kind of once you learned that medication was an option. Did you get going on the naltrexone, or were there other medications, and what was your response to it?
Yeah, I did start with naltrexone. I think my this addiction medicine specialist that, as you say, I was lucky enough to connect with, and that's what we're trying to change here, but that I was lucky enough to connect with, did two things that were different than all those prior treatment experiences. One was accept my goal of moderation rather than abstinence. And then the second was suggest naltrexone as a place to start. And it was something I was totally unfamiliar with. He wrote me a prescription that day. I, probably spent a month of thinking it over and letting it sit on my shelf, and then dove in. And I was lucky enough to have really positive results from the beginning that have been pretty consistent, in that the kind of first sip of alcohol that I've had pretty much is the same when I'm taking naltrexone. What's dramatically different is everything after that. That desire for a second drink, and certainly that kind of experience of losing control and having runaway consumption, started to dissipate, for me at least, right off the bat. So, there's definitely diversity of experiences that people have with the medication. And I think it's fair to say mine was kind of towards the very positive end of the distribution in terms of how quick and how dramatic the results were. but I think definitely representative of the sorts of success that many people have once they find out that this is an option.
Yeah, that's so cool. And yeah, people do respond at different rates. Some people it takes longer. And I always tell people it doesn't mean it's not working. Like we're all just unique and our relationships with alcohol are different. Our biology, physiology, everything is so different. So I've even seen people who are on the medication for months and months and they're not sure if they're seeing changes. And then all of a sudden they start to notice these small changes gradually. And that's another piece. I think oftentimes the changes can be so, at least for me, they're like gradual and subtle, but if I paid attention, I could see them. But if we ignore them and we're not really looking for them, they're easy to dismiss. And would you say that was true in your experience too?
Yeah, for me, the more gradual changes were kind of on the what I think of as the other side of the ledger, in that the alcohol consumption went down pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But noticing how much easier it was and how much more fulfilling it was to tune in to the other positive experiences in life, that was something that I think was a little bit more gradual, or at least that I noticed a little bit more gradually. How I was able to, actually get satisfaction from doing yoga for the first time, which I never had felt before, or even an ability to be inspired and energized in fulfilling creative pursuits in a way that alcohol had started to chip away at, being able to be present in important moments with a romantic partner or family member or close friend. Those I took a little bit more mindfulness, but were very real, and I think continue to be part of the reason that we like to say that less alcohol can be so much more in so many other areas of life.
Oh, it's so true. And I don't know about you, but like I didn't even realize that I wasn't necessarily fulfilled or present in those things because alcohol was taking that front seat and I needed it even to do 5K runs. Like I would only do the ones with beer at the end kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
it's like for me, I didn't realize like that I wasn't, getting the true joy that can come from those moments that you describe. And
Yeah.
as we get less numb from alcohol, not go abstinent, but we're just drinking less, it's just those things kind of take on a whole new life of their own. And it sounds like that was true for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be a little eye-opening and sometimes, and beyond, to be transparent, even a little intimidating to take stock of everything in your life that may have become a little overly oriented towards alcohol. But it can also, I think, open up a world of opportunity if you're willing to seek out some of those activities and organizations and friend groups that are a little bit less alcohol oriented. And I think kind of having the medication kind of in your back pocket is just kind of a foundation or removal of blockers, at least for those of us who develop some sort of biological dependency on alcohol.
Yeah. And yeah, I just have to ask because this is such a common challenge I see with people as a coach who are on this method. Like the medication's working great, they're noticing a difference, but it's like, well, now what do I do with my time? Or how do I cope with this really stressful day when I don't want to drink, but I don't really know what else to do? And I'm curious if like there's some wisdom you could share with us or just things you've learned now that you're in hindsight of that experience. Like what helped you to proactively, reconstruct this new version of yourself or this new life for yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you're right to call it a challenge. No big change in one's life is going to be overnight. I think for me, it was finding activities and relationships that I always kind of knew I enjoyed, but had perhaps underinvested in. So mentioned yoga, perfect example in the activities bucket there. And then similarly, there were a set of relationships that I think very subtly alcohol had eroded a little bit, but that were still there. And I think that's probably true for a lot of us, is that there are, people who are still very much rooting for us, who are still want to be in our lives, who we can give more of ourselves to as we drink less. But it definitely takes some intention and, maybe even writing out a list to make that happen. It's not magic.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for speaking to that. I'm always just curious to hear from people, their personal experience and what helped them, because it is so varied and individualized. And I think people can learn a
Yeah,
lot
I also
from
got a
that.
dog,
Yeah,
and she would probably be
that was
offended
it. That was
if
it.
I didn't mention her. That takes plenty of time and energy, and has its own frustrations and fulfillments.
Yeah. I want a dog. I think that's probably a key to, yeah, changing your drinking habits.
Yes,
So
that accountability to another living, breathing creature is a good motivator.
yeah. It's really hard to take care of a dog when you for me, I like had a dog and I was like at the bar all the time when I was really in my struggles. So it was like I gave my dog to my mom, which I kind of feel really bad about. That was years ago. I can't even have a dog now where I live. But anyway, I digress. It is good to have a dog. So I did want to ask you one more question and then jump into kind of more OR related stuff. But how has it been for you going public with your story? And I know you're public on your own website about your struggles and obviously here with me. How has that been for you? And was that something that was like kind of challenging to come to grips with?
Yeah, it was much easier once I ripped the Band-Aid off than I thought it would be. I think given the extent and longevity of my struggles, there were very, very few people in my life for whom this was surprising news that I had struggled with alcohol. And so what I really experienced was just, really kind of overwhelming and inspiring levels of support and encouragement, people being happy for me that I was addressing what had been such a barrier, and which, some of them at least probably wish I'd recognized and taken action on earlier. The one thing that was more of a barrier for me was kind of merging my personal experiences with alcohol with my work life. I had not been open with colleagues along the way about struggling with alcohol, although some may have noticed. And so that was, I would say, even a more pleasant surprise was how encouraging colleagues were, even when it was kind of in the context of leaving an employer that I loved working at to go work on OR full time. There too, people were really encouraging that I was doing something I was extremely passionate about. And so I think this is just a classic example of our worries about what people think of us generally being way worse than the reality. That was definitely my experience.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. And the same thing, as I started telling my story, I was like, do I really do that? I just kept getting this pull to make a video and tell people about naltrexone and kept putting it off. But once I did it, the outpouring of just support and people that totally related, and oh my gosh, you put my experience into words. It's just like, it's healing. It's like balm for the soul because we're not alone. And so it's awesome that the impact that you are going to have, that you already are having, and just the ripple effect for years to come by having the courage to tell your story and launch. Or it's just really awesome to think about that.
I appreciate that, Katie. Yeah, it's definitely for those who are kind of on that edge. It's worth the leap of sharing it, and probably ends up enriching a lot of relationships, as well as helping people who may be a step or two behind you on the journey.
Absolutely. So let's talk about OR. Okay, so how did it come to be?
Yeah, so it grew pretty directly out of my personal experiences. I reflected on how many places I'd sought help, how immersed in the healthcare industry I was professionally, and it was hard not to be shocked that I had not been introduced to medication as an option. So I kind of had these two feelings at once, feeling really excited about the progress I was making, and at the same time, a bit dismayed that there seemed to be this gap in awareness. And it didn't take too much research, reading a bit of the literature, talking to some physicians, to understand that I was far from alone and that there was this recognized gap between the appropriateness of medication and naltrexone in particular as a frontline treatment for people experiencing alcohol use disorder and the extent to which it is actually prescribed relative to the scale of AUD and its effects in our country. And so that seemed like a fairly clear opportunity to help a lot of people and build a business, huge unmet need. That's what I was trained to look for in business school. And so pretty quickly started kind of building OR. It's not the sort of business that you can build out of your apartment in the same way, maybe a clothing business. You could start sewing prototypes and sending them around. Naltrexone is, of course, a regulated FDA-approved medication that has to be dispensed by a pharmacy. So there was a little bit more building and finding the right partners associated with some businesses. But it was a pretty straight line from like the initial idea of let's use the tools of telemedicine to make effective treatment more approachable and naltrexone specifically more accessible to what we launched with.
That is so cool. Yeah, it's for those who don't know, like OarRx.com is their website, and it just it makes it really easy to get a prescription to naltrexone. I wonder if you wanted to talk about that. How does it work? Like if someone is interested in naltrexone and now they're aware of, or what does the platform offer, and how does it work from the consumer end?
Yeah, so we have a three-step process. The first is an intake assessment where the consumer provides information about their experiences with alcohol, their interest in various treatment options, and then a bit of a medical and medication history so that their clinician can make an informed decision. The second step is provider review and the formulation of a treatment plan. So a clinician, either a physician or a nurse practitioner, typically, who is licensed in the state that the member is coming to us from, reviews that information, asks questions as necessary, and puts together a recommended treatment plan, which, if medically appropriate, will include a naltrexone prescription. In the instance that it involves a prescription, the clinician writes that, sends it to our mail order pharmacy partner, and the medication is on the way to the consumer's house, typically arriving within a few days. And then the third component of what we offer is ongoing medication management support. So the patient can reach back out to their clinician at any point with questions about getting started, side effects, is it working, is the dosage right for me, should I be taking it daily or in a targeted fashion, really anything that comes up. And that's kind of the essence of it today. Down the road, we want to do two main things. One is add more ways of supporting patients. So we'll have a companion app coming this year. And then the second is thinking about whether there are other areas of addiction and compulsion where we can help either our current customers or folks who are struggling with other areas of addiction and compulsion.
That is so cool. And I love that you guys it's so seamless, and it shows up to their house in a few days, so they don't even have to go to a pharmacy, which just makes it so easy. And I said it earlier, but just the barrier that has existed for so many people to get naltrexone, and that is still true in a lot of different countries where literally they can't find it in their country. And so the fact that you're making it so easy for people is just I really think it's going to revolutionize the treatment world and hopefully raise greater awareness about naltrexone and how effective it is for treating alcohol use disorder.
We hope so. That's certainly what we hear is convenience, privacy, access to expert physician and nurse practitioner guidance are the three things that I think we hear most commonly as why folks are finding success with OR. One patient in particular who sticks with me, said that she lives in a very small rural community, and literally knew personally every physician and the one pharmacist in town, and really didn't feel comfortable disclosing that she was seeking treatment for an alcohol issue. And so we ended up being the perfect fit for her.
That's so cool. And okay, so I know you mentioned that one of the things you guys offer is like a ongoing kind of, is it like a subscription for the prescription, which is really cool because sometimes people will get a 30-day supply and then their physician won't refill it, or they've got to pay again to go see the doctor to see if they can get more. And so it's just, again, these barriers that are there. So you guys are eliminating that by kind of setting it up with a prescription service that automatically delivers as often as someone wants. Can you talk about how that works?
Yeah, that's right. So it is a recurring subscription model, which means that if a prescription is written, we will, on a periodic basis, just send a refill of the medication and charge the consumer's account. Included in those charges are the ongoing access to the physician or nurse practitioners with as much frequency as needed. So we're not withholding medication, requiring you to come for a follow-up visit. We want you to have the support that you need. We offer those subscriptions on monthly, quarterly, and biannual bases. Some discounts built in for longer sign-up periods. We think, in general, as you were saying earlier, Katie, long-term treatment tends to produce the best effects. So we want to encourage people to sign up for 3 or 6 months and make that commitment. But if they're more comfortable going a month at a time, that's something we support too. And they're not going to be, surprise charges to keep doing that.
Well, that's so cool. Yeah, I think, most people I know who have gone on naltrexone, it's like I always tell people, like, you have to give it at least a good 3 months, at least, to know if it's going to work and not throw in the towel too early. If someone's having serious side effects, which are pretty darn rare, but of course they do happen with medications, people can have like intense nausea or something with it. But in most cases, I think it's a good idea for people to give it a try for at least 3 months before reevaluating, and even longer, to be honest, because I've seen people who've used naltrexone for, like I said, like 6 months or 9 months, and they're like, is this even working? And then they start to pay attention to the changes that they're seeing.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is maybe the number one thing that we're trying to help our patients with the most right now is if they have an experience that's different from mine of kind of seeing desired results essentially from day one, which is great. If they are more in the camp of needing to give it a few weeks, perhaps needing to work through some level of side effects, kind of sticking with it. It is so important, and it's I don't want to turn this into a commercial, but it is a great highlight of kind of the role of what coaching or peer support or any of the other resources that folks like Thrive provide it just seems like a natural complement. Just like most types of medication, you're boosting your odds if you can stick with it a little bit longer. As I think about what we're doing at OR, we're providing access. We're going to work on providing more and more support to stick with it. And it's great to have others kind of in this ecosystem that I feel like is growing around effective medication-assisted treatment for alcohol use disorder. Others like Thrive that are kind of helping people do everything that can boost their odds of success.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think just human nature, I know when I started, I was like, oh, I can just take a pill and it'll do all the work for me. I was kind of humbled a couple months in when I realized, like, oh, I'm feeling these emotions I didn't feel before. And I noticed I still drink every night, even though I don't really want to, because naltrexone's working. And so there was like a lot more to unpack and kind of heal, I think, than I was anticipating, because when you're in the fog of alcohol use disorder, it's like you don't see beyond that, or at least I didn't. It was like I was kind of living for my next day and my next drink. I wasn't really planning for my future or thinking beyond that. So that was a humbling experience for me, and a lot why we started Thrive is because, like, I want to set people up for success so they don't feel like they need to throw in the towel, because I think that is it's a really sad thing when it happens when someone, isn't making those changes alongside the medication, and maybe they stop taking the medication and just kind of go back to their old habits, because alcohol is a very effective coping tool and we can keep using it in that way. Definitely, especially if we stop taking the naltrexone. So
I
Yeah.
think that's such a super important point. As we look across kind of maybe the whole history of folks trying to confront alcohol problems, I think historically, we'd probably say there was too much emphasis on the, do it without medication, maybe even rely on willpower alone. And that is probably not the optimal approach for everybody. But by the same token, we don't want to go too far in the other direction and say, take this pill and all your worries will go away. That's a radical simplification and an oversimplification. We think access to medication is a critical element for many, but as you say, coaching or other forms of psychosocial support is a great complement. It's kind of two tastes that go super well together. We tried a lot of names for OR before we landed on OR, and one of them was assist. And I think that really captures how we think about naltrexone, in that it can be really helpful in taking some of those steps of reorganizing one's life. But there's no pill that can do that just in one go.
Yeah. So just since you mentioned it, how did that name come to be?
I think it's a maybe more metaphorical way of capturing that concept of an assist.
Yeah, I love it.
We want to be a tool that helps folks navigate out of choppy waters and make their way in the right direction.
That's cool. I love it. It's creative. So I know you guys you're in quite a few states in the US. Do you want to talk about how many states you're in and what your plan to expand is across the whole US?
Yeah, so we're currently operating in 20 states, which represent more than half of the US population. We'll be adding 7 more shortly in this first portion of 2022 that we're in as we talk. And then our goal is to be nationwide this year.
Wow, this year. That's so cool. And yeah, for people watching, I'll link the website below so you can see the states on there and check out their website as well. One last thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap up, because earlier you mentioned, when you were kind of seeking treatment, everything was abstinence based. And I'm curious, because I think one of the most appealing things about naltrexone is you don't have to quit drinking. Obviously, I know when I went on it, I had no plans to quit drinking, and I kind of accidentally quit after a year of taking it because I just genuinely lost interest in drinking, but that was never my plan. It kind of met me where I was at with my moderation goals. And so what are your thoughts on that kind of changing, I guess, the mindset of the existing treatment system, and maybe not changing the mindset, but just offering a different option with moderation? Because I find that even people who are really struggling and not succeeding with abstinence, when I try to convey that there's a medication option or there's this other option, it's hard for me to even get through, because we're so stuck on abstinence is the only way, even though it's not working for me, that's what I have to do. And I'm just curious, with your personal experience and just thoughts on it being in this industry, how has that been, kind of trying to let people know that abstinence isn't the only option? Certainly it works for a lot of people and it's great for people, but we need this other approach also, because there's a lot of people struggling with that as the only option.
Yeah, it's meeting folks where they are is one of our core goals. We, and I know you, want to make treatment as approachable as possible. And it is hard to convince people to get started if your opening gambit is to tell them that their goals are illegitimate. Abstinence is a great goal, and in some ways simpler. Yes, no, black, white, you're abstinence or you're not. But it's not right for everybody. I can just tell you from my personal experience that in that kind of critical conversation with a specialist where I got started on naltrexone, I was probably more open, for whatever reason, about my goal of moderation. And it was just critical to the pathway that conversation went down and the course of treatment went down, that he kind of received that information non-judgmentally, was supportive of that goal, and framed the discussion of treatment options, including naltrexone, within the framework of that goal. I think that's a good model for all of us to aspire to. we should be transparent about the relative benefits of abstinence and moderation. And there is some evidence that folks that commit to abstinence have more success with that treatment goal. But we should be very supportive of whatever goal makes sense for the consumer in their lives. Ultimately, they're going to decide. And so we should create an option set that creates really good pathways with the goal of moderation, which is the goal that I've continued to maintain and feel really happy and proud of being able to achieve.
Yeah. Well, that's great. It's been so nice to chat with you, Jonathan. Is there anything else you wanted to say or share before we wrap up for today?
No, I appreciate you having me as a guest, Katie. This was super fun, and appreciate the chance to connect with your audience.
Yeah, thanks so much for everything you guys are doing at OR, and maybe we'll have you back again soon.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
Bye.